Everyone for joining us this session, this very beautiful Wednesday morning with us. Today we have here with us Siobhan and Nicole, who are from Australia. Siobhan, Nicole, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Siobhan Howard. I am the customer consultant for research intelligence here in Australia and New Zealand. And I'm joined by my colleague, Nicole, who I'm not sure if she's going to be able to say anything. I think she's got some mic issues, but Nicole is also based here in Sydney with myself, covers the same region, but is in a little bit of a different area in terms of engaging with Science Direct and journals. And we work very collaboratively together throughout our kind of customer interactions. So very pleased to have her join her, but she might not be speaking today. No problem. You can interact with her on the chat.
Thanks a lot for joining us today, Nicole. So today would be the fourth session for this year in terms of what we're doing for Malaysia as well. And today we'll be talking about analytical features and research metrics in Scopus. Broadly speaking, we'll be talking about the content and the quality of journals on Scopus, followed by Scopus journal and article level metrics, key metrics in Scopus, and of course, a question and answer session. We won't be very PowerPoint heavy, but what we want to do to make this is more like lively, more of a discourse. And at the same time, we'll also be doing a couple of live demonstrations as well. So I'll hand this over to you, Siobhan.
Thanks, Nick. So really kind of starting off, I think it's important to touch base on the quality of journals on Scopus, because when we want to have a discussion around metrics, it's really important we have that understanding of what actually is covered within Scopus. So to kick us off, the three major themes that Scopus tries to provide solution for is that ability to allow you to progress, evaluate, and reflect the research activity of your institution. And this is done through a whole host of different assets and in ways that you can engage with Scopus as a product. There's a very big variety of different document type items, which covers way more than just journals. It's inclusive of serials, conferences, books, all kinds of documents, pre-printing information, really giving you access to a very comprehensive output selection, which then we kind of organize into these different profiles for you so that you can start to make sense of this output from the perspective of a researcher and really start to engage with how a researcher might be performing. All the way up to profiles around an institution. And that is a really huge part of Scopus, are these different kind of profiles that you can engage with and start to gain insights from in that metric domain. Of course, then as well, really important to have that understanding of the award type data and funding type data that you also would have access to throughout Scopus to kind of give you a very well-rounded understanding of what is happening in a publishing sphere such that we can get insightful analytics off of the back of it. Now, this kind of image that we have on the screen is full of some really juicy content. So if we actually go on into our next slide, we'll break it down a little bit, more in depth, because I think it's important that we have this strong understanding of what Scopus really does. So to start us off with, from this kind of, circle that we're looking at of Scopus, the outside of this circle is all of the different, perhaps challenges that Scopus is trying to provide a solution for. So the first, of course, being the many metrics, so we will be kind of reviewing and really digging into today. But then, as mentioned, these different profiles that you have access to within Scopus to start gaining insights on the researcher all the way up to that institution type level. And the real kind of success or way that you can start to rely on the insights garnered from these profiles and these metrics is due to the fact that Scopus has a really kind of powerful and trusted curated system of content, which you can rely on as that gold standard, such as, the kind of search interactions that you might be having, or the different information that you're trying to gain from Scopus, you can really rely on as being impactful, reliable and robust in the information that it pulls from. Kind of as well, rounding off of that off, I do think something that maybe is a little bit lesser known, or at least something that is very, very powerful within the Australian community, and I'm not so much sure how it would work in other communities or other research ecosystems, are the APIs and kind of data export options that you can get out of Scopus. There's so much that you can gain from this data outside of the platform itself, and the research metrics that we'll be reviewing today, all of that is accessible through the Scopus API as well. So again, all of this different opportunity that you have to engage with Scopus is really kind of fundamentally supported. Nick, if you don't mind going into the next slide. Really fundamentally supported by the enabling technologies that kind of sit at the base, the bedrock of how Scopus performs. There's a huge amount of variety here in terms of the strategy that we implement to make Scopus the powerhouse that it is. But to kind of start off, I think it's really important to understand that on top of all of the tech that we have within Scopus around machine learning, natural language processing, our algorithms, which are kind of doing affiliation linking, all of that ultimately is going to have final eyes on in terms of what our content is based on the inclusion of our content selection and advisory board. So CSAB, as we refer to it in short, are a group of subject matter experts across all of the domains that Scopus houses content for. And ultimately, they are the deciding factor of whether or not a journal or document or anything really is going to be included within Scopus. So that it's not just very powerful tech backing up this product, but also a team of experts who really have eyes on everything that Scopus is doing and kind of covering content-wise. I think, thank you, Nick. Thank you. Next one. All of this kind of going into a context of Scopus is really allowing you to start making connections across a very broad variety of content types, information types, data sources as well, such that if you click one more, Nick, such that you can start to gain really insightful analysis across all of that, right? We are kind of doing the work of connecting all of this data for you within Scopus such that you can just benefit off of the metric analysis domain as a kind of second step. And as such, again, we will really be getting into the nitty-gritty of that, but there's so many different areas of information that you can dive into with Scopus and that we kind of pair and curate for you. Next slide, please, Nick. So to really kick off a conversation, I think, about Scopus, it is, and particularly metrics, actually, it is important to have an understanding of what this data type is. And a large portion of that is actually having an understanding of what our coverage is like. So as you can see on this slide, we are far more than just Elsevier type content. We actually cover more than 7,000 publishers across more than 100 countries. We have content in more than 40 languages and kind of constantly seem to be developing that out even more. And if you take a quick look at the map on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll actually notice that for both APAC and Australia and New Zealand, our content coverage is very comparable, very competitive rather, when it comes to other products that are in the market, these kind of abstract citation databases. We have really phenomenal regional coverage for these areas in comparison, where some others can be a little bit skewed to NOAM or Europe and whatnot. And so for our region, particularly as APAC, I think it is a really important thing to kind of hold in your mind that you can rely on the level of coverage that we are experiencing here as true to our region. Furthermore, kind of on that really comprehensive coverage note, understanding that level of historical period that Elsevier is able to provide coverage for. I'm sure many people are familiar with Elsevier as a large publishing company. But we've been working within this space for more than 200 years, and as such, we have the content coverage and that historical domain to content coverage that you would expect. So going all the way back to 1788, and kind of constantly as well building out the analytics to be able to look backwards. Of course, a huge momentum that has been driving across our research community has been the push for open access. Scopus is more and more developing open access type content with many filters to be able to really gain the specifics of what type of open access a document might be. And this is a real big push from us to get more and more open access type documents. And then perhaps the kind of last piece to cover up on this front is really that it is not just an Elsevier type content base, but it's also not just a journal type content that gets covered on Scopus. We're pulling from conferences, from book series, and really mindful of different type disciplinarian outputs and making sure that we capture that relevant to multiple discipline types. So you really can count and trust on the coverage that Scopus has, as well as this kind of speed of coverage. Scopus updates on a daily basis. We're constantly indexing new material and very much at the forefront as a gold standard. Next slide, please, Nick. So this slide is a really important piece to knock off in terms of what is that inclusion criteria for a piece of content to get pulled into Scopus. There's really two phases to this. The first being just basic selection criteria that all titles have to meet in order to be considered for a Scopus review. So that is, it needs to be peer reviewed. It will need to have abstracts that are in English. It will need to be regularly publishing output. There needs to be a cadence of regular publishing, as well as references will need to be in Roman script. And then of course, there will need to be a statement of publication ethics. So once a title can confirm that all of those criteria are met, then it will get put forward to our consultation and selection advisory board, which they then kind of take their expertise, their subject domain expertise, and start to really fine comb through these further areas of selection. So, journal policy, really focusing in on what is that journal about when it comes to peer review or open access, for example. Of course, then the quality of the content. Scopus is really focused on ensuring that we are bringing in quality content that our customers want. And as a result, that's a criterion for selection. Journal standing, making sure we are pulling in the top journals or the journals that our customers most want is a kind of equivalent desire from their perspective. Then, of course, again, that regularity, a publication schedule, and then online availability is a really important piece of the puzzle to make sure, of course, that you can access this information online as well. So it's a very, full-on process really to have a piece of content selected into Scopus, really rigorous method that we are very transparent about as well. There's a lot of information online that you can find if you are wanting to get something included in Scopus. Have a look into that and just know that it will need to be meeting these different criteria in order to potentially be included within Scopus. Next slide, please, Nick. Now, on that note, it is critical to kind of keep in mind what Scopus has domain over when it comes to content. Scopus has domain over our data set. We have the ability to be selective with what kind of journals or content we include, and therefore, we can kind of provide metrics on. Of course, our consultation board is also very involved in monitoring our content, constantly keeping it fresh and up to date. If there are any predatory type journals or journals that are maybe not at standard, that will get removed. So that is kind of where Scopus sits in terms of, capturing and making sure that our content is regarded well. But something that is really important to keep in mind, I think we always get questions around this is, well, what if I have found a journal that I think is perhaps hasn't published in the way that I want, or can you make a name change on my behalf? Or all of these decisions ultimately will sit with the journal and we don't have domain over. So for example, authorship is a very common one. We can't change authorship on your behalf, nor could we kind of make decisions around quality of an article or conferences that get pulled in. All of that happens outside of our kind of Scopus universe, as we call it, and is not something that we have ownership over. Thank you, Nick. Now, with all that being, in mind around what can Scopus do, we take really strong action. You'll see around predatory journals, but perhaps to kind of start off this idea of poor quality journals. What is our inclusion criteria? If something has come into Scopus, what are those performance standards? And I think it's important to remember that yes, it is important to have very, very strong content, but sometimes certain disciplines don't perform in a certain way that others do when it comes to these metrics. And therefore, while we see one journal is really skyrocketing in some journal metrics, another one that is very important to a community of researchers won't be comparable on that kind of performance benchmarking. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be included and that we shouldn't be able to engage with it for representation for that research community. So it's a very nuanced engagement around what is best fit for engagement of Scopus. And again, really relying on our consultation, selection and advisory board to have that level of domain specific expertise that they can kind of help guide that decision making. Now, really of importance is this kind of predatory journals element. This is something that Elsevier takes very seriously in not allowing predatory journals to kind of benefit off of Scopus or, make way through Scopus. We have many different internal policies around escalating and whatnot. And I will say, a lot of the times predatory journals get flags at an individual level. Somebody in a university library who's started to do analysis and all of a sudden sees suspicious behavior. At least that's how it's been presented to me. Nick, I'd be very interested to hear how your interaction has looked like with predatory journals, because I know in Australia it's it oftentimes seems to be looking externally and saying, oh, I'm really concerned about this journal, perhaps in India or whatever. And I think that they might be self-citing or self-inflating their own metrics. So I'm interested, how has your kind of experience with predatory journals been?
Actually, it's a very good point. I was going to ask you more about Australia itself, sharing in mind too, because it's a very different situation over here in Malaysia. So in Malaysia, because of the ranking systems due to MyRA 1 and MyRA 2, there is a certain impetus for researchers in Malaysia to have to publish in Scopus index journals as well. So obviously that's a very key thing, right? And there are times when people there were accusations once upon a time, I think back in 2020, when people were saying that Scopus was indexing predatory journals. And that's something that we obviously want to set the record straight. We do not index predatory journals. That's also very quiet. That's also one of the key reasons why we need to define very clearly as to why sometimes journals may have low metrics, but they're still included within Scopus. And one of the key things that we always do is that we actively monitor, observe, and curate our journal title list. And that's also one of the key reasons, right, that Scopus source list is now updated on a monthly basis, because we want to show people which titles are active and which are discontinued. And one of the major inconveniences I do know that our authors in Malaysia do face is sometimes when they publish in a journal that was indexed in Scopus, but it could be discontinued the very next month. That's a massive inconvenience that we know that our community is facing, but unfortunately this is the case because we need to make sure that the journals indexed on Scopus are of a minimum quality standard and they do not compromise in terms of publication ethics. I'm not sure about your authors as well. I'm sure this problem is a common problem that also occurs in Australia too.
I was just going to say we've had very much the same experience in terms of feedback from the community of that discontinued content. And what do we do? How are we able to continue our analysis of this kind of discontinued Scopus source? But I agree with you in terms of monitoring predatory journals is at least in the moment the most important thing. And we're working on maybe a solution, but primarily it is to focus on not having predatory journals. So interesting, the difference there, but still quite similar in many ways. Maybe next slide, please, Nick. Well, I think all of that, having it within a context of where does our Scopus content actually get used in? Well, because of the reliability and really robust quality of Scopus content, it's become the gold standard across many different use cases globally. Not only are we used in a lot of the major university rankings, such as QS and the Times Higher Education Impact and World University rankings, but also we're commonly used in a lot of government type decision makings. Australia, I don't see anything on the Australian map, but we have got a lot of interaction with government here around how can we best support government-driven initiatives with our metrics. I'm sure actually Malaysia has recently, or Singapore rather, has recently had some major developments in that area, haven't they?
Yeah, we do have. So I think we work very closely with Nanyang Technological University with regards to metrics as well. And that's why we have our annual arms. Also not reflected here actually is our very close working collaboration with the Malaysian Citation Center as well, which is how we've provisioned the access to the 20 public universities in Malaysia have had access to Scopus, as well as SciVal being hosted over at MCC itself. So from a broader Southeast Asia perspective, we work very closely with the Thailand Citation Index over in Thailand with Professor Narongwit, where they use and leverage on Scopus data, and they were also able to work very closely to help the Content Selection Advisory Board to also screen for local journals as well. So I would say that our involvement from a Southeast Asia and ANZ perspective definitely seems quite in-depth as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely agree with you on that. And I think, to be honest, it will just keep growing because there's more and more, I think, looking into these types of metrics as really good proxies for, other types of output, which I think we'll get into a little bit later on. We've got some slides on that. But perhaps now getting into our next segment, I believe, which is, really starting to dive into what are the types of metrics that you have at your disposal within Scopus, and some context for how you might want to start working with them. So always, whenever we're talking about metrics, I think it's really important to highlight Elsevier's approach to working with metrics to ensure that responsible use of metrics. And as such, we've developed these kind of two guiding principles for how you should approach working with metrics. One, you always need to make sure you are using both qualitative and quantitative type metrics in any of your decisions or output thereafter. So while the metrics we're reviewing today are that quantitative knowledge that you'll be able to gain insights from, always be inclusive of your own knowledge, your expertise of the field or the individual or the entity that you are making those assumptions about, because a number is again just a number until it's put into context, and that context is qualitative. So always be using both types of inputs. Always then as well, we are pairing with our second rule, which is that it is always best to be using more than one type of quantitative input. So that is the reason why we have so many different types of metrics, is because each metric will have its pros and its cons, strengths and limitations. And it's never a good idea to rely on one metric as a fully comprehensive kind of understanding of what it's trying to represent, because it will always have a limitation. As a result, we have developed so many metrics to kind of help balance that and to have well-paired complementary metrics to each other, such that if one has a limitation, you can easily pair in another and it will help balance off that limitation. So those are the kind of suggestions that we make for best practice, and really do expect our customers to kind of approach in this way as in order to make the kind of best use case of this data and the metrics that they provide for. Next slide, please, Nick. So I think there's always a lot of curiosity around the responsible use of metrics, and particularly what Elsevier's kind of stance on it is, or where we have played a part in the responsible use of metrics. So I encourage all of you, I'm sure you will receive a copy of this presentation after, I'm assuming. Yes, I encourage all of you then to go ahead and take a look at the linked article that is shared there, as it gives a very comprehensive understanding of how Elsevier has been engaging on the responsible use of metrics. I think in this instance, dating back to 2012, 2013, something like that. But basically, we have kind of kicked off and been a really integral player to what responsible use of metrics looks like, such that we have actually developed out our 12 principles of research assessment. And these really go through a variety of different expectations for what Elsevier needs to be able to share with our customers, which is multiple metrics, our basket of metrics, accessible to all different types of stakeholders. And a really key piece there is that it should be automated and scalable. We do a lot of work on that front to ensure that you are able to access this data and these metrics in that way. We also, as a result, spend a lot of time upfront in any conversations around data and metrics, ensuring that there is knowledge sharing around responsible use of metrics and expectations for how these metrics can be used externally to the kind of conversation that we have in present. As you can see as well, there's so many kind of best practice type interactions that we strongly kind of encourage everybody to have an understanding of in terms of making sense of these metrics. So, ultimately avoiding aggregated type metrics or reflections. We want people to have the most transparent interaction with this data to be able to comb through, make sense of it themselves. Everything is kind of open science in a way. And that's something that Scopus does a really good job of supporting. Now, Nick, you've been in the company a little bit longer than me, so I'd be interested to, from this perspective, is there anything that kind of jumps out as a major standpoint from Elsevier's perspective on responsible use of metrics?
I think one of the key things that people always tend to ask us, especially within Malaysia, is for mostly like whitelist and blacklist, right? And I think one of the key things that we always need to articulate is that there's no such thing as black and white. There's really a whole range of gray. And I think one of the key things that we really talk about when it comes to using of metrics is always using a basket of metrics, right? So in your earlier slide, when you talk about both quantitative and qualitative, we always need to put things into perspective. And I think I'm going to jump a little bit further in here into this presentation and also point out that one of my favorite metrics is the field-weighted citation impact. And obviously, we'll talk more about this later, but it really showcases how citations is normalized in its own subject field, and it contextualizes the entire perspective of it. So that's what I actually really like. And I do know for a fact that within Malaysia, within Singapore especially, the NRF in Singapore, they really like the FWCI because they feel that this is a normalized metrics that shows data in context. And I think this also really is very important because when you use metrics, you need to take into consideration how to use judgment, how to use perspective. There's no perfect metrics. But at the end of the day, it really boils down to how you want to contextualize the data itself. So I think that's something which I would say, we've been very consistent in over the past few years. And hopefully our community would definitely agree on that. And we'll also be able to apply the same as well.
Really, really good points. And I'll add as well from your comment on perspective. I think a lot of these metrics, if they're taken out of context, you lose that ability to communicate what is actually meaningful about the metric. And so, you can have two people looking at the same number, but perhaps making different inferences about what that means. And so the more that you can kind of include information holistically, the more assured you can be that whoever might be receiving that output is understanding it in the same way that you are. Next slide, please. So to start kind of giving everybody an idea of the different types of metrics that you will have at your disposal within Scopus, they're roughly broken down into these three categories. So you have researcher level metrics, which of course, based on our profiling within Scopus, you can kind of make an assumption that it's of a similar type of metric to the institutional type metrics. Then of course, we have our article level metrics, keeping in mind that the root data within Scopus is publication level data. So of course, all of our metrics are kind of anchored into the article level type, data. And then our third kind of major metric type is going into journal level type metrics. So metrics that can help you understand the impact or influence or perhaps ranking of a journal within context. And all of these together will give you insight into different elements, different areas of what your kind of question might be of this information. And so it is kind of important to just be mindful that each tells or gives insight into a little bit of a different domain. And so when picking your metric, perhaps being mindful of where that metric is kind of hosted from will help you decide, okay, what am I trying to answer? What am I trying to gain insight from? which is then, of course, to kind of put into this context of these research metrics can be used in a very, very big variety of different use cases. So, of course, metrics can help you analyze the strengths of research at an institution, as well as seeing where you might want to potentially invest in research or maybe de-invest if that's a word, move money away. Where is the best place to be putting your attention towards, as well just your kind of larger perspective on ROI. Do you want to see what has been that impact of a piece of research? Metrics can help you glean that. Another perspective that is particularly useful on our author profiles and the type of author level metrics that we host is that ability to start engaging with who are the experts in a certain field, who might you want to recruit into your university. That is a very common use cases across these metrics. Definitely not last but not least, but just on this slide, this kind of showcasing type behavior that we see within metrics. Metrics can be, a really important part of storytelling about what has happened in research, what has happened in an institution, and all of these kind of use cases together, Scopus provides for, and then some. The next slide, please. Now, I'll actually point out on this slide, the link that is included here. I strongly urge every single one of you to click on, download, have at your disposal by your desk. It is a cheat sheet of all of the different metrics that are on Scopus and really easy to interact with in kind of a flash way. But at a very high level, the different research metrics that you'll have at your disposal within Scopus broadly offer across these different areas. So they can help you from a research perspective, actually figure out what is worth my time in researching, where should I be spending my reading energy? Then kind of your publishing strategy. This is a very common use cases for not just our researchers, but all the way up to kind of enterprise level publishing strategies around, okay, we want to ensure that our research is getting engagement, it is having an impact, the community is kind of interacting with it. So having a publishing strategy to help you figure out where you will make the most kind of bang for your buck is a really common use case that we see. Then, of course, you're kind of showcasing type use cases around our profiles. So very, very common, at least in Australia. A lot of our institutions here will actually use the Scopus API to pull for their website researcher, pretty much like a LinkedIn page for their researcher that pulls in all of their metrics, all of their publishing output. And it's not just used for kind of internal, find a researcher, but also external showcasing. It's a very, very common use case. And I will say, come to our Scopus author profile session that we're having in another month or so, because it will help a lot if this is an area of interest. Then, of course, all of that is to say the kind of promotion and tenure type track, a lot of that is looking into our metrics to kind of give an instance of success or showing excellence. Our librarians, they oftentimes interact with Scopus to help them understand where they should be putting their money towards acquisitions. And then last but not least, something that I actually spend a lot of time focusing on in my work more in SciVal is this benchmarking behavior with metrics, because, metrics, again, I think I've said it, a number is just a number until you place it into a context of something that is meaningful. And so anytime you're doing research analytics, kind of rounding it out with a benchmarking behavior is best practice. So for all of these use cases, benchmarking is very applicable. So main purpose of our metrics, I think broadly can be put into these 4 categories. First, evaluation of research performance. This is something that happens at all levels, from your researcher being evaluated on promotion or tenure or a grant application, all the way up to, a DVCR who is trying to assess what is worthwhile in terms of structuring. Should they restructure? Large decisions at an institutional level. Then, going all the way up at a government level, we have countries that are engaging with metrics in this way to help them decide where they should put their funding. So this evaluation of research performance is a really critical piece to understand, because it is how kind of global communities are engaging with these metrics. Furthermore, as I've kind of been saying already, this showcasing of performance is a very common thread that we see coming out of Scopus. Again, not just for our authors, but to an institution, to a country. There's so much that you can gain here in terms of being able to, actually demonstrate what research has had in terms of an impact. Actually a very good practice to get into, or something that I see of huge benefit to my customers, is when they start using this information for scenario modeling. I think the power of these metrics and the information that they hold for individuals is that you can start to be strategic. You can really be strategic in the information that this is defining for you. And you can have a little bit of perhaps predictive control over, if we were to do X, it might result in Y or Z. Whereas before, you wouldn't necessarily be able to kind of have those type of scenario modeling type outcomes because there was no representative information for it. So that is a very common use case we see well across research intelligence, is scenario modeling. And last but not least, we've already spoken about ranking from the perspective of the kind of larger rankings that happen of our universities, but it's much more than that. Parents will be looking at rankings and all of this type of information when deciding where to send their kids to school. And I know very much so friends of mine that apply for PhDs, they look into these rankings to see, well, should I go for this school or that school? And so all of this information, again, there are so many use cases that it's important to be mindful of, such that you can ultimately be engaging with the metrics in a way that will be in service of one of these kind of 4 purposes. Next slide, please, Nick. Now, this is one I am personally very interested in because at least in Australia, we're having some major changes in terms of what are the most important metrics to be engaging with. I think historically, there's been such a lean into bibliometrics and this idea of research excellence. And in Australia, we've been able to see that in how research is evaluated at a country level, which then of course affects funding. It's a very competitive funding landscape here. But as such, there's kind of been some major cultural shifts recently towards defining metrics that will give us an indication for how impactful research will be. I think this is, I'm sure it's definitely coming across all of APAC. I think most countries around the world are now starting to think through, how can we showcase research being impactful? At a very high level, I think the approach that Elsevier is taking is almost back engineering from a potential area of impact. As you can see on this kind of circle here, let's say societal impact. We want to be able to demonstrate this. We're kind of back engineering into a proxy of a metric that will be able to give you a concept for what societal impact an output might be posting. So, for example, in that instance, it could be policy citations. How much government engagement are you having? Is it having an effect on law as an output? Clinical citations, news mentions, all of these different kind of captures as a proxy for impact. I'm pretty sure everything on the screen is already hosted within Scopus or through PlumX. And I will say this is an area that's going to have huge development over the next year or so in terms of what kind of metric indicators you'll have at your disposal. Anything you want to add on this? Because I know it's such a hot topic at the moment, is impact.
I think it's a very good point that you brought up. And I think even within Elsevier itself, we're constantly trying to put our fingers on the pulse of the research community. I know there's some metrics that are always coming in, and there's some metrics which are moving out. And I think I was going to bring this up earlier and actually get your feedback on this, but I'm aware that we stopped tracking tweets, or what is now known as X. And I think this just came across probably about a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, I think for me, that was very interesting because now we've started monitoring Twitter itself. And that's just one very good example of metrics that are coming in and then also subsequently moving out as well.
Yeah. And my understanding of that as well is that it was a little bit touch and go. Should we do this? Should we not do this? It was a lot of engaging with our customers. And I think that's an important piece to always keep in mind, is that all of the indicators that we have and have built metrics for are based on what our customers are asking in terms of they would like to be able to glean information from that area. So Twitter is a fantastic example because we heard so much from our customers that they're not really using Twitter or X as much as they used to be. So probably wouldn't have as much worth bringing it into PlumX or Scopus anymore. But yeah, I agree. I think we'll see a lot of changes. Now, for that kind of example that I just gave around societal impact and perhaps showcasing that through different types of metric indicators, a very common one that we pull through is policy type citations. More and more, we're seeing policy data as really heavily used amongst institutions trying to demonstrate this level of impact that their work is having. So from that perspective, I think it's important to just highlight a lot of this information sits within PlumX, and perhaps when we get into Scopus, we can get into a document and actually show exactly where you can find those PlumX metrics. But from this perspective, when it relates to policy, once you are kind of within that PlumX domain, you'll be able to see policy type information from all different levels of government type organizations, as well as cross government. It's not just kind of country specific. You're able to see multiple country governments interacting. And this provides kind of overview and citation pulling from a whole variety of content that policy officials engage with. So guidelines, white papers, etc. What else is on the screen? To again, really give you that kind of interaction and ability to show the strength of a research output in fields outside of the obvious in research and academia, perhaps. So just to kind of highlight one domain of that, really interesting. When we get into PlumX, we'll make sure to show exactly where this is. Next slide, please, Nick. Okay, awesome. So now we actually are going to throw it back to the audience and ask you guys to share within the chat what you think might be a good use case for some of these metrics, or what you might be interested in gaining from these metrics for your institution. We'll leave some time now to allow you guys to start filling that into the chat. But really do make most of this, because it will help guide us as well. If somebody comes up with, we're really interested in this, we'll make sure that we cover it within the rest of this session.
I would say don't be shy. I know most of the time people always be a bit reticent about putting in questions, but I would say this is entirely a safe space. I recognize quite a number of names who are in the participant list. So please do feel free to type in any of the use cases in the chat and Q&A. And then we can probably do a live demo subsequently, and then we can address some of the queries that you brought up as well.
Yeah, awesome. I will say as well, you know, I joined Elsevier just over a year ago and totally new to the industry, totally new to this entire kind of way of thinking. And I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to start tackling research metrics if you've never really done so before. But again, I just want to reiterate what Nick said. No question is a bad question. This is how we learn and kind of make the most of, you know, using these metrics and making sure we're using them in the correct way.
So I'll reiterate, please don't be shy. I think everyone should be able to type in within the chat box or the question and answer box. Or if you don't have a direct question that you would like to ask right now, you could probably type in later, and we can also tackle it subsequently towards the end of the session itself. Yeah, I'm sure there's quite a number of use cases because you guys are always asking us queries with regards to research metrics.
There we go. We've got one. Thank you very much, Maud. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Maud Nazir.
Mohammed.
Mohammed, okay.
Yeah.
Hello. So in IIUM, we put emphasis on translating the knowledge generated to the community. Is there any metrics that can give a feel of that? Knowledge exchange. Very good question, Mohammed. I'll leave that for you, Nick.
Let me mull over this question just a bit.
I think, you know, when we think about knowledge exchange, I actually think a lot of the, well, I've got my SciVal hat on, so maybe I should caveat with that. But within SciVal, you have the ability to see a lot of the collaboration that goes on between entities. And I think that that is a really good proxy for seeing how knowledge exchange happens. To be, yeah, you can actually see a little bit of it within Scopus, I believe, some of that collaborative type behavior. But I think it is a really good way to say, okay, knowledge that we've housed here within our institution has actually been so impactful. It's made its way all the way overseas and is now kind of being used and infiltrated as such. So leading into collaboration type metrics, not just academic, but we also have sector type metrics with collaboration where you can see academic to corporate. You know, I think when we're starting to think as well about impact and the level of development that we're doing with metrics in relation to impact, there's a lot to be said for this kind of research commercialization or innovation pathway and what that means in terms of knowledge exchange. So there's, I think, a lot that we're going to be developing in that space, and already some kind of pre-proxies for that. Yeah, what do you think, Nick?
I think from a Scopus perspective, there are a couple of things which can come off the top of my head. So first and foremost, whenever you author a paper over at IIUM, you probably find in Scopus itself who your co-authors are within Malaysia, within Singapore, within the rest of the world, right? Because in a way that is you establishing and delivering a research that has global impact as well. Another thing which I can also think of, for instance, is for within the authorship, you can probably see the grants that the university is getting, which also showcases what sort of attraction that the research is garnering and attracting as well. So this shows the impacts and ramification of the quality of research that you're able to deliver to as well, right? And we do know that for sometimes some research also translate into white papers that is being delivered for the government as well. And sometimes you can also find this in the grant numbers too. So it's a very tough question. I don't have any outright clear metrics that I can give you straight away. But what I can point you to is that there are a lot of indicators that you can find within Scopus itself that will showcase the impact of the research that IIUM has generated. For instance, like what Siobhan has said with regards to co-authorship, with regards to academic collaboration, with regards to industry collaboration, and also through the impact of grants. And maybe through all these indicators, you'll probably be able to have fingers on the pulse of your community in terms of the impact of your research.
I think I might just quickly add to that as well. I agree with you on all of it. Perhaps as well, PlumX metrics, I think would be a really good thing to lean into in relation to how research is having an effect outside of academic circles or, you know, professional type circles, just how the layman is interacting with research. You can gain that kind of insight from PlumX because you'll be able to start seeing what Wikipedia type referencing is coming up, or, you know, is it being previously tweeted about, but now is it showing up in Facebook posts or YouTube videos, and the links that we're able to gain from that to, for instance, social media, I think is a really interesting way to see the impact of research, and in working with a lot of researchers, the excitement that they get when you show them PlumX about one of their outputs, and you're able to show, hey, look, you are having this impact way beyond your current circle. I think it's a good starting place for sure.
I really like seeing the plum print because the plum print itself just shows you all these indicators and you're able to see the overall impact, right? Because alt metrics isn't just one specific metrics per se. It also in a way contextualizes broadly itself. What's the implication of this article level metrics? But of course, we'll go into this in more detail once we go into the live session at Scopus itself, and then we can point you through some of these indicators that you'll probably be able to see through PlumX. But this is a very good question. It took a bit of unfolding.
It was. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you. I think in the meantime, we'll leave the floor open to more questions, right? But what we can do is that we can probably jump onto the next component because we probably want to explain in more detail what key metrics in Scopus would be like. And there'll be three key metrics that we've talked about. One would be site score. The other will be SNIP, or the source normalized impact per paper. And the third one will be Scimago journal ranking, which I think many of you in Malaysia will be very familiar with as well. But we'll go through site score first, because I first started talking about site score, and this was developed back in 2017 and 2018. This was a metric that was much more comprehensive, transparent, and current view of a journal's impact. And it uses a 4-year citation window, which we calculate using data from Scopus. So this formula has been tweaked a bit. We have expanded it now to a 4-year window, and we're using the data from Scopus site score metrics to help validate citations that are received by journals and proceedings. I'll walk you through site score in a couple of slides later because the 2022 was just released about a couple of months back. So you probably find the most latest and updated version of site score 2022 before you as well in a bit. SNP is also a metric that people look at, and sometimes they also wonder what exactly it is about. And so what it does, it normalizes the impact per paper. And we talk a lot about with regards to how Elsevier places a strong priority in terms of contextual metrics. So the University of Leiden developed this metric, which measures contextual citations by weighting the citations based on the total number of citations within the subject field itself. So now the impact of a single citation is given higher value in subject areas where citations are less likely, and the impact of a single citation is less value in subject areas where citations are more likely. To give a much more concrete example is that we'll take a look at, say, the total number of citations from, say, a medicine journal, which would obviously be a lot, and we compare it to the total number of citations in a mathematics journal. So mathematics tend to garner less citations in a journal because that's just how the subject field is like. So what we do is that we compare the mean ratio, right, with regards to number of citations within the subject field. So now we are able to ascertain just what's the quality of that medicine journal as compared to the mathematics journal, right? And one thing which I want to point out is that SNP is used at a journal level, is used as a journal level metric, which is a bit unlike the field-weighted citation impact, which can be used at an article level metric. And we'll go into that more detail later on as we speak too. SJR or SCImago journal metric is a bit different, and this is what we call a prestige metric that can be applied to both journals, book series, as well as conference proceedings. So within the SJR, the subject field, the quality and the reputation of the journal, they all have a direct effect on the value of a citation. And very similar to SNP, it has an understandable scoring scale of an average of 1 for comparison. And we go into SJR into more detail towards the end of the session because it's very, very detailed. There's a very intricate formula with regards to it, and it's actually quite cool and geeky at the same time. So the reason why we talk about our whole basket of metrics, right, is that we want to contextualize metrics so that you have a better understanding of it. And this is why we always talk about using multiple metrics, because we want to compensate for the weakness in one metric with the other. So we talk about field-weighted citation impact. It's one of my favorite metrics. It compensates for the differences in field, so you're able to contextualize it. It also compensates for differences within the type and the age of the metric itself. And there's a meaningful benchmark being built in where 1 is the average for a subject area. But the one thing that people do not like about the FWCI is that the numbers are small and people superficially may not like small numbers. It may be complicated and also very difficult to validate. And there's no idea of magnitude because you don't know how many citations it represents. But this is the part where I think it's useful. And when you use field-weighted citation impact together with the citations per publication, the citations per publication showcases a large number. In a way, it showcases range, it showcases magnitude. It's simple and it's easy to validate because it's a count. But what it doesn't show in terms of a citations per publication is by differences within the field, within the type and the age. And it's also meaningless without additional benchmarking as well. So you really want to use FWCI together with citations per publication as an example to really showcase what is the impact, what is the magnitude, and what is the context of the metrics that you're looking at.
I might quickly add, Nick, I think field-weighted citation impact is such an interesting metric because it seems to have been, it's like now this industry standard. Everyone uses field-weighted citation impact, but at least in Australia, I'm kind of more and more getting feedback perhaps that there's, some negatives around field-weighted citation impact that are a little bit considerate around sample size. And so it is a very easily skewed metric when it comes to a smaller sample size. And it's a really interesting effect. If you have 20 articles for a single author, and one of them happens to have a fantastic article level field-weighted citation impact, but the rest of them are quite small, it will skew very easily. And so sometimes what I often suggest is just, this slide actually is a fantastic reminder of where qualitative knowledge is really critical to include in this kind of quantitative context around look at the sample size associated with field-weighted citation impact such that you can kind of make that reference to, if there is any kind of skewing effect. I hear that so much from people within Australia. particularly authors who maybe have had a career break and they weren't getting citation during a certain period, or, even early career researchers. I think there's a lot of different researcher types that have interaction with field-weighted citation impact. So qualitative knowledge is always good to include, is the moral that I want to include there.
No, I think it makes perfect sense as well. And it also contextualizes as to how a certain outcome may have unraveled along the way. Like for instance, I remember when the Lancet first published the first article on COVID-19 back in 2020, and the field-weighted citation impact for that was absolutely off the charts, because that was the first paper, the first research on COVID-19 that was being written about. People kept on going back to it. And of course, naturally, the number of citations became really, really high. But it makes sense because these are what we call seminal research topics, right? And these are research papers that people tend to go to. They are the classics. So naturally speaking, they tend to generate more citations, and the impact, of course, would be higher as well. So that's one perspective that you can get when you're talking about FWCI in terms of context as well. But that's a very good point too. So one thing which I wanted to showcase was the 2022 insights for CiteScore. So this is actually very new. I would say do refer to it. Some of you who have known me for some time will know that I've been talking about CiteScore for quite a fair bit of time now. 2022 is pretty new. The methodology is from 4 years. So we are looking at the total number of citations from 2019 to 2022 to articles, reviews, conference papers, book chapters, and data papers. And it's divided by the number of publications in the 4 years as well. So needless to say, we have a CiteScore 2023 tracker that showcases the active performance of the journals that we're talking about too. So I would say that this is straightforward. It's available for free on Scopus. No subscription is needed. I want to really emphasize this because I know in Malaysia that you're also using Web of Science as well, and then you also have to pay for the journal citation report as well. For CiteScore, this is completely free. I think one of the cool things which I really like about CiteScore as well, before we go into the live version, is that you're actually able to see how the formula is being counted, right? So you're able to see the total number of citations, the total number of documents. You're able to analyze it further through the rank and trend. And that's something which I really like. And I think, Siobhan, this is something which I found to my experience really useful, because when I speak to my research friends about certain journals in certain topics, they are able to point out very accurately how useful this is. At the same time, they are also able to point out how odd sometimes some journals are within the ranking list too. So some of the things that I wanted to highlight that I don't think it is 100% perfect, but I would say it's a very good indicator that you can point forward and identify top performing journals that you can choose to publish in, for instance. So I'm not sure how the use case for the CiteScore rank and trend is for you over on your side.
From my perspective, I think CiteScore is very commonly used. The transparency of this metric is really well liked within Australia. Exactly what you're pointing out about being able to see the actual ratio of what is comprising that number, really allows people to start digging in and doing their own analysis from that level, which I think is really well liked as a metric interaction. I would say as well within CiteScore, it's got use cases in other metrics that we have within our research intelligence portfolio. And as a result, more and more people in Australia are kind of engaging with CiteScore as a very fair way of kind of, normalizing disciplinary effects and normalizing a lot of the kind of variables that we see affecting journals. I think CiteScore manages really well. So at least in my region, it's the most common of the three that we kind of have at journal level.
That's good to know. So we also talk about article level metrics, and I think this is something that you can take a look at when you go into Scopus itself. I think at this point in time, I would probably stop sharing the slides, and I think we can probably go into a live environment because it would probably make more sense itself. Give me one quick second. Yeah. So I think one of the things that you can probably do on Scopus itself. So I think these days, a lot of people have been talking about with regards to artificial intelligence, right? AI is a very big topic. I think it's the trending topic of 2023, although I think COVID might be coming back pretty soon. Touch wood.
Oh no, don't say that.
Prepare for the worst.
Focus on AI.
But we'll talk about AI. I think AI is probably much more positive itself as well. So one of the key things I think when we take a look at, say, AI in health and medicine, right, covers the two important things itself. When we look over at in Scopus itself and we go over to the article level metrics, and that's where we can unpack a lot of what we have been talking about today. We are able to see, for instance, the total number of citations in Scopus. We're able to see the rank percentile with regards to this. And we're also able to see the field weighted citation impact of this research article itself. We can see the total number of view counts, and we can see over here the PlumX metrics. And I think this is a good time now to jump into PlumX metrics so that you can see exactly what it is that we're talking about. And yeah, the infamous plum print itself. So one of the cute things about the plum print is that each of these colors represent a different domain. So orange would be for citations, purple would be for captures, yellow would be, for instance, mentions, and then blue would be in terms of social media itself. And I think you can just unpack a lot of data. So for instance, right, I think Mohammed Nazir, I think you spoke earlier about understanding the impact of your research. Plum print would be a good way for you to see, right, for instance, the research of your article. You'll be able to see like how many times it's been cited, who the readers are, where it's been mentioned in news, and I find that actually very useful as well. And then you can see the impact of the likes, shares, and comments on Facebook. I was so used to saying like, shares, retweets, and comments, but now I can't say that anymore.
I think PlumX actually like formally ended their partnership with Twitter just because it was no longer seen as a reliable source.
Yeah, I think it's very important, and I think it's actually very good fact that how important it is to curate data properly, right? Because when you curate data properly, I think, for instance, like for Scopus, what we do is we work very closely with the content selection and advisory board to make sure that the journals are of sufficient standard before we curate them. And that's also why the titles are moving in and out, because whenever there's a slippage in quality and the journal is not good enough to continue to be indexed, we discontinue what we call the forward flow of these journals. So right now, I think there's a very big concern, I guess, with regards to the data authenticity that we are seeing on, say, X. So I think that's also a very big question that we have to factor in as well. But that's one of the key things that we can talk about with regards to PlumX. When you come and take a look here within Scopus itself, and then we are able to see all these metric counts. Now we can see all these metric details. We are able to see the citation benchmarking. And I find that this is actually really useful and powerful as well. I think at the same time, and I'm going to jump into journal sources because we're talking about an article level, and I think this covers the key things that I really wanted to highlight. Unless is there anything else on this page that you want to talk about, Siobhan?
No, the main one that I would have pulled up was PlumX, so you're already on it.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
No, all good.
All right, so the next thing that we also talk about with regards to the Scopus source page would be over here. And I think people always ask us, what's the latest updates, right? Is it how often is Scopus being updated? Scopus is updated daily. The source list is now updated on a monthly basis. So for those of you who would like to know more about which journal titles have been brought in recently, or which journal titles have been discontinued, or you want to know the full corpus of Scopus source titles, this is something that you can do. You can just simply select this, and then you can download the Scopus source title list. If you want more details about the site score, SNP, and SGR metrics, you can request for an overview, and our colleague will probably send you the full data for site score, SNP, and SGR over to you as well. So you need to fill in a request form for this. It used to be downloaded for free easily, but I think this colleague of ours wants to probably find out and to understand much better the use cases in which you're requesting the site score metrics for. So do bear with us. It's something that we also want to know, like how we can help and support you better too. Over here, it's actually quite cool. I think you have options to choose which title, which publisher, and which ISSN you want to choose for, as well as the subject area that you're browsing for within your subject area. I think we have 333 or 32 subject codes on the ASJC, if I'm not mistaken. And this is something that is very much in detail that you can browse through as well. So if you're interested in, say, what subject area are you familiar with, Siobhan?
Well, in Australia, we actually have our own subject classification. We use FOR codes, and oftentimes we have to do a lot of mapping between Scopus's ASJC to our FOR codes. So I'm going to leave this one to you. ASJC is not my area of expertise.
Oh, good. I don't think people actively use ASJC all the time as well, right? But I think this is a very good indicator that people would like to look into. So normally the example that I like showing would be probably for Lancet itself. So Lancet is one of our key titles over here in Elsevier. So the funny thing about the Lancet itself is that whenever I type into Lancet, you get a whole bunch of stuff, and that's because we have a lot of content. So let's take a look at Lancet Regional Health Southeast Asia. Don't think I've used this specific one before, but let's take a look.
I didn't even realize we had that many Lancets.
Yeah, I think it's new, right? And I think this is one of the things that I think is a regional health one. So this one here is an open access. It's possible that it's a newly launched title, which is why that you can see the site score is 1 and the percentile is 22%. But there's nothing to hide with regards to this. So yeah. So one of the key things that we can see on the source metric over here is that you can see when it's being indexed. So this title here was indexed from 2022. It's a very new title. And we can see over here, this is by Elsevier with the EISSN over here itself. One of the key things that I always wanted to emphasize and make it very clear is that not all Elsevier titles are indexed within Scopus. Even for Elsevier, even though we do own Scopus, our titles still need to be gauged and assessed through the same procedure that everyone else is. It's open and it's transparent, and this is something which I really want to emphasize and to clarify with everyone as well. And also we tend to get questions like, what's the difference between Science Direct and what's the difference between Elsevier and what's the difference between Scopus, right? I don't think we tackled that. So for those of you who are new to this, I would just like to clarify that Elsevier is the company. We are a publishing company of over 200 years. We do publish titles, and these titles for full text articles are under Science Direct. Scopus is the world's largest abstract indexing citation database. We own it, but we work together with over 7,000 publishers to make sure their content are fairly evaluated before we do index them within Scopus itself. So maybe we'll give some other examples with a bit more publication history. Let me see if I can find this one. Oh, yes. So the Journal of Cleaner Production is an Elsevier title, which a lot of Malaysian authors actually publish in, right? And this one here probably gives a higher end of the range with about 99 percentile. So you can see the site score over here. You can see the SJL here, and you can see the SNP over here itself. You can see the subject areas in which it falls under, which is business management and accounting, environmental science, engineering, and energy, which is renewable energy as well. We can see over here in site score 22, this is a total number of citations, and this is a total number of documents to date. And even though this is updated, and this was computed and launched as of 5th of May, we can see that as of 5th of September, the 2023 tracker performance showcased that this journal is very much on a very strong track to even better performance compared to 2022. We can see that there's about 332,000 citations with 18,000 documents to date. This number will probably increase as well. And this is the part that we talk about, the rank and trend, which I think is a very useful tool for researchers to go into, because now that you can see in Cleaner Production under strategy and management, this is ranked the 4th journal, and it's in the 99th percentile for this category in strategy and management. And it trends behind tourism management, Journal of Management, California Management Review, etc. itself. If you feel that this is not what you're looking for Journal of Citation, Journal of Cleaner Production for, and what you're looking for is general environmental science, you can switch the categories accordingly as well. And then you can see that JCR is ranked 5th in this particular subject area as well, right? And this is something that I would encourage you all to take a look, because at the end of the day, you're probably most familiar with the journals that you're using and the journals in your field as well.
I would agree that this is one of the most strategic places you can come to look for a publishing strategy. Yeah, there's so many journals out there that are really credible, but we often don't know about them because they're just not the top ones that we think of. So this area we use so much in Australia, at least my customer base does.
Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that, because even within Singapore, when I speak to my friends about this, they don't know about the rank and trend at all. The moment when I show them the rank and trend, they're like, oh, this is familiar, this is in it, this is in it, this is in it. This is not in it. Why is this not in it? Then, we have a discourse on this. But yeah, this is something that I really like. And I think when people ask us, what is a good place, or if we have a whitelist or a blacklist in terms of journals, I would say that we never have whitelist or blacklist. But I would like to point you to this particular component, and this part here will point you will give you a good indicative direction of where you may consider publishing in as well. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm just going to go back to the slides, because I think we jumped quite a fair bit as we dive into it. So give me a quick bit. So we talk about Plum X, right? Because now you're familiar with article level metrics. We talk about how you're able to leverage on citations, right? To know how many times the article has been used as your reference, and how the more citations showcase how the publication referred to your article is more pertinent and more relevant based on the knowledge that you have established as well. We talk about field-weighted citation impact when we talk about how well cited the document is when compared to other documents, with one being the baseline value and the global average as well. So I don't think we talk about the year of publication, but we use a 3-year window for FWCI, I believe, and we compare it to the document type as well, and the disciplines associated with the source. The part that we haven't covered about, yes, this is with regards to quickly speaking about the author profiles. And you probably find that the author profile page is now very different from the last time I talked to you about it a couple of months back. And that's because there is a lot of new things that's being added onto it. I won't spoil us for the next session, but very quickly speaking, I'll point out some interesting metrics that you can take a look over here, including the document counts that you can see here. You can see, of course, the H index. You can see the total number of documents. We have the author metrics that you can browse about, or you can join us for the next session. We can see the total number of citations. We have worked together with a bunch of preprint engines so that we can showcase early indicator in terms of research. And one of my favorite ones would actually be topics, and we can see the most contributed topics as well, right? Where you can see the most number of publications that were published recently, together with its corresponding field-weighted citation impact as well. And of course, the award grants to showcase our indicator in terms of government research. This is some examples in which metrics are being leveraged within the author profile, so that you can find what's the best way to represent yourself, for instance, in terms of a promotion and candidate perspective too. So speaking of showcasing yourself, I think one very good example that I like using would be to say, when you want to show evidence, right, it's not just about saying that, okay, I'm an author, I have 17 citations, I have number of Twitter mentions or number of Mendeley bookmarks and blog mentions, right? Because at the end of the day, you're just stating numbers, but you're not contextualizing the impact of what you have done. So my encouragement for you is, as an author, leverage on all the research metrics, right, that you are able to garner. Talk about how the 17 citations place you in the top 5% in terms of economics research in Scopus. So this gives you a good indicator. You can talk about your impact, right, in terms of international impact, and you can say that your work has been mentioned, bookmarked, or viewed in over 40 countries according to this particular source. You can talk about how your paper has been covered by 10 media outlets worldwide, including prominent media sources that you're familiar with, like the BBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Straits Times, for instance, and it's recommended in X and Y blogs and described by a prominent researcher as a significant step forward in our understanding. So in this case, you're able to showcase and prove yourself and to really put yourself forward by leveraging and contextualizing information and evidence too. Yep, and we talk about how we are actually able to use Scopus source by leveraging on the metrics and browsing through the different metrics to also look for target journals for publication as well. Yeah, and I think this is a part where I wanted to just talk about briefly for those of you who are really interested to know about how SGL works, right? Is that Simago Journal Ranking, it is not owned by Elsevier, but we work together with Simago Journal Labs, where we provide them with the data and they use Scopus as a data source to develop this indicator. Because for them, based on the methodology, it best represents the structure of world science at a global scale. They look at the prestige of a journal and it considers the sources of the citations to win rather than the popularity as measured by counting all citations equally, because it functions on the premise that not all citations are equal, and they're not. So each citation that's received by a journal is assigned a weight based on the SJR of the citing journal, and a citation from a journal with a higher SJR value, for instance, like someone is citing, Lancet is citing your work, right? And it showcases that, or scientists on Nature. And this showcases more impact because a citation from a journal with higher SJR value is worth more than a citation from a journal with a low SJR value. At the same time, it also dissuades, right, journals like, okay, if I cite my work, you can cite mine, you know, we cover each other that way. It dissuades people from that. So it's much more, in a way, altruistic in a way. And citations coming from highly important journals would therefore be more valuable and would provide more prestige to the journals that are receiving them. It normalizes for differences in citation behavior among subject fields too. So this is how SJR works. And for those of you who are really, really keen, I've attached a link for you here that you can click on it and you can see the full paper. The full paper is actually hosted on sciencedirect.com. So yeah, just FYI. So yeah, in summary, right, I think Siobhan and I have spoken quite a fair lot today, but I think there are some keynotes that we want to talk about here in terms of golden rules is that both expert opinion and research metrics in plural, they are needed to fully describe research performance. The basket of metrics that we have talked about is a menu that contains diverse metrics for all entities, and metrics relevant to your question should be selected from the basket for the entities that you're investigating and for suitable peers that you may want to collaborate with. Research metrics would allow you to showcase, evaluate, and to profile different types of use cases for different reasons, and they will help you for more informed decision-making and strategy and profiling. And at the end of the day, what we want to say is that you should use all the evidence available. You want to be very clear and specific and to build a coherent narrative to showcase context. Siobhan, is there anything that you want to add here as well?
It's a great summary slide. I think whenever I go through metric type information, I always like to show on Scopus what are the kind of built-in features that can help provide some guidance around these metrics, because oftentimes when people are using them in real time, it can be a little bit tricky to remember all of this on the top of your head. And our product team is very mindful of that. So there's so much built into Scopus to kind of help you along your way. Not sure if we have time to maybe get back in, but just showing reference to, you know, the little information eyes that are next to all of the metrics is a great way to kind of consistently stay in tune with what the benefits or limitations of metric might be, as well, of course, the support article page. There's a fantastic amount of articles that our Scopus team hosts, creates, that also provide so much insight into what these metrics are. So again, not sure if we have time, but it might be worth showing those.
Yeah, I think we have time. So I've stopped sharing so you can like do the demo from your side.
Awesome. Let me pull that up 1 second.
In the meantime, this is our summary slide. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to type them in as we are doing this new demo as well.
Yes, please do. But okay, can you guys see I've got Scopus open?
Yeah, I can.
Yep. Okay, awesome. So I think the first place everyone should be aware of is how you can access our support center. So it's just coming up into a little question mark up in the upper right-hand corner, and then you click onto support center. And the great thing, I feel like I learned Scopus and all of our other products through our support center. We have some really phenomenal articles up here where you can pretty much type in anything that is of interest and you will be given a bit of an answer. So let's say you wanted to know a little bit more, let's say about site score. You can go ahead, pop in that metric, and if it plays game, there we go. Be given so many different reference pages to give you some more information. So I will say, if you are engaging with metrics, know that you have this as a resource for any first questions. So that's one place really good to kind of be aware of. Perhaps the next best place to show it, I'll get back into, we were just looking at sources, and that's what jogged my mind around the impact or the information metrics. But let's say I'm just going to click into this first journal here. And you'll automatically notice on this page, next to the metrics, we actually have these little information eye bubbles, which you can click on, and it will just give you that reminder of what are we working with here. And you'll notice it around all of the different metrics. So anytime you see a little information eye, I strongly recommend clicking on it. There's oftentimes a link there for more information, and it can just kind of help you keep this information at the top of your head when you're actually working within Scopus. So that was all I wanted to share, just two little kind of within product guides for how you can make the most out of this. I can see we've actually got a question that's just come through, so I'll hop off the screen share. Oh, no problem.
She was being very polite and nice.
No problem, Mohammed. Thank you for your question earlier.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of new product updates, I think, that we've made on Scopus, which I think has made it much more product friendly as well. And it's also a lot easier to navigate and then basically ask questions that, probably in a way you'll be able to find answers to as well. But there's a lot of new resources that Scopus has as well. So if you go to elsevier.com/Scopus, you can find that there's user onboarding and engagement together with the Scopus library guide. There is Scopus Academy. So some of you librarians as well, I think some of you may have joined us previously for the Scopus certification program, and there'll be a new certification program that will be launched, and we'll be in touch with you very shortly for the new cohort, right? Because there's a lot of new product updates that's been going on as well. So maybe you'd be interested to find out what the latest new updates will be too. So within Malaysia itself, there's a lot of onboarding that we've been doing in place. Your CCs here, myself and Benny, will probably be around to help you with regards to it. There's a support hub, there's a library guide, there's a certification program for the librarians. And of course, we'll be working together with librarians to create basically onboarding programs, as well as webinars and trainings that you hopefully find useful, like today's session itself. Before we kind of end up, there's a couple of other things that I want to point you to. Some of you may know that I've been talking about the Journal Finder for some time now. For those of you who have not, this is a free resource that allows you to find journals that are best suited for publishing your scientific article. The Elsevier Journal Finder has been updated so that you find that it looks very different from how it looked like previously. But in short, what it does is that it uses smart search technology and field of research specific words to allow you to search for journals which match your articles to Elsevier journals itself. So just feel free to type in your abstract or your keywords or the aims and scope, and then we give you a list of Elsevier journals that you can go towards to have your articles to be published. And this is a recommendation. It's not a definite must and guarantee, right? But these are areas that you can point you towards where you may find your articles to be published within an Elsevier journal. And of course, there's also Researcher Academy, which is a free online platform that takes you through the different phases of the research cycle, all the way from research preparation, writing for research, publication process, peer review navigation, and communication, and how you can communicate your research itself. So yeah, that's really it for our side, I think. I think we spent the greater part of 90 minutes talking, and I think hopefully we were able to showcase and to address many of the questions, some of the questions that you probably have at the back of your head, and hopefully we answered it well.
Lovely. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining today. And as well, thank you, Nick, for having me. It was a real pleasure collaborating with you.
Thank you for coming along, Siobhan. It was great collaborating with you and doing this for everyone. I hope our community probably found it useful. And once again, on their behalf, thank you so much, Siobhan, for coming over and sharing your insights from an ENZ perspective as well. I think we all learned a lot tremendously from it.
I feel I learned some from you as well. So it was good knowledge exchange.
That's great. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. So yes, there will be a recording and we'll disseminate it to everyone as well. So not to worry, you have a copy of the slides as well as a recording, and you'll probably receive it in your inbox in a day or two. So not to worry. In the meantime, we hopefully we'll be able to see you for the next 2 sessions sometime in October and November. Do stay safe. Take care. We see you all around soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.